Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video, and also welcome back to my 6th installment of my Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker Expanded Edition novel by Rae Carson. So let's get straight into today's video. Today I will be sharing the part of the book, or parts of the book, that relate to Leia's death and past, Leia's lessons, and this also includes Luke's appearance on Ach-To, where he confronts Rae as a force spirit, force ghost, whatever you want to call it. This video may be a bit of a long one, but I hope you stick around for the ride. Shouldn't be too long. Let's get right into it. Leia watched Rae sprint away, a hint of a smile on her lips. Training the girl always filled her with pride, but also misgiving. Rae was both a wonderful and exasperating student, frustrated with anything she didn't pick up quickly, completely unaware how fast she did pick things up. She wasn't one to judge, though. Leia had exasperated Luke just as much. Besides, there was something about growing old that made her connection with the Force even stronger. When the body began to fail, the mind reached out, unencumbered by physical ability. The truth was, Leia couldn't run through the jungle if she wanted to. Peace and calm came easily because her body craved them. Then again, perhaps Leia had never been young. By the time she had reached the age Rae was now, she was leading a rebellion. Rae could be a great leader someday, and she would be, if Leia had anything to do with it. The girl had darkness inside her, just like Ben. But Leia would not make the same mistake she had with her son. She would not give in to fear, neither of the darkness rising within her pupil, nor of her own questionable qualifications as a teacher. Most important, she would never send Rae away. Leia turned and began walking back toward the base. She reached out a hand and let her fingers trail through the ferns and broad-leaved creepers that lined her path. Agent Kloss held so many good memories. Years ago she had trained here with Luke, who had declared it nice Dagobah. He'd claimed it was as wet, warm, green, and overflowing with life as the planet where he'd trained with Yoda, except it didn't smell bad. She stepped into a clearing. To her right, a large tree with a massive trunk reached for sunlight, spreading a canopy of branches that shaded the clearing, keeping anything else from growing except ground-creeping ferns and low sparse grass. Leia had trained right here, in this very spot. She reached out and touched the tree trunk reverently. A large ball of bark had formed around an old wound. It was almost sealed shut. Leia had been the one to damage the tree. She had swung for Luke with her lightsaber and missed, slashing into the tree trunk instead. This tree had been healing itself for more than 2 decades. Oh, Luke, I hope I'm doing this right, she thought. Leia was no Jedi Master, but she had learned from the best, and not just from Luke. Over the years she had occasionally heard the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi through the Force, and even more rarely that of Yoda. Some days it had felt as though she had learned from the Force itself. She was first and foremost a politician and a general, but she had accepted her Jedi legacy and embraced it as best she could. And maybe that's exactly what Rae needed. Training in the Force, not from a formal master, but rather someone grounded in the everyday miniature of life and survival. Obi-Wan had failed to keep Vader from the dark side. Luke had failed the same way with Ben. She could not fail Rae. Insects sang as she walked, birds warbled overhead, and tiny amphibians thrilled their mating calls. Odd how such a raucous place could be so peaceful. The noise was so loud, so ever-present, and so soothing, it was almost as perfect as silence. Many years ago, not long after the Battle of Endor, she had discovered the meditative power of sound. She and Luke had stolen away for some training, and somehow she'd ended up standing on her hands, while Luke slung good-natured taunts her way. Even with help from the Force, her shoulders had started to burn, her arms wobble. They had already spent the last hour sparring with their lightsabers, and her body was exhausted. You know, Luke had said, his voice smug, when I did this on Dagobah, Yoda was sitting on my feet. He said that a lot back then. When I did this on Dagobah, it was obnoxious and completely unhelpful. So Leia reminded him, you're being obnoxious and completely unhelpful. I also did it one-handed, he added. He was trying to provoke her, to teach her a lesson about anger and impatience and all that nonsense. Luke had forgotten that his student was a superb strategist who'd already benefited from a royal education. Leia would not be provoked. Instead, she considered. She reached out to the Force, let it flow through her like blood in her veins. A tiny insect began rubbing its mandibles together, whistling a sweet high song. Some instinct guided her, and Leia focused on the sound. It was beautiful, pure, ethereal, completely untethered to the worries of leadership and teaching, failure and learning. With focus and with delight, Leia raised herself off the ground. She floated upside down, feet pointed to the sky. After a moment she lifted her arms and held them parallel to the ground. But she was just a student, new to the ways of the Force, and when she came back to herself, fully realized what she had done, she whipped her hands back down lest she fall. She did it just in time. Her form collapsed, and she found herself kneeling in mud. No matter. She'd do better next time. Leia looked up to find Luke staring at her, mouth open. "Did you ever do that with Yoda?" She couldn't resist asking. He shook his head wordlessly. "I can do better," she insisted. "Float longer." Luke found his voice. "You're going to make me a better teacher," he said. Not the response she'd expected. "What do you mean?" He reached down, helped her up. "Your footwork is terrible," he said. "Don't get me wrong, your lightsaber craft is coming along, but you do other things, naturally." His face turned apologetic. "What I mean is you're exceptional, just different." Then he had smiled, with that wide farm boy grin that had stayed with him all the way up until the night of Ben's betrayal. Leia shook off the memory with effort. Memories were coming fast and vivid these days. She was glad for this one, though. It would be the key to training Rae. Leia and Rae were different, the last remnants of a dead order, and together they would carve a new path. Leia, there is only one thing left to do. Galaxy save us all from big brothers, she thought. Luke said, "You must try to reach Ben." She flashed back to holding her tiny son in her arms, his black hair still wet with birth, the way he had cried all the time in those early months but settled whenever he sensed that she or Han or Chewie was near. His first steps, his first word, the first time he had sent a toy flying across the room with the power of the Force, calling on his tiny toddler rage. "I never gave up hope for him," she said. "Tell him," said Luke. With his words came a rush of knowledge, and a vision memory of Luke sitting cross-legged atop a cliff of Ach-To, shaking with effort as he projected himself onto the battlefield at Crate. The effort to reach Ben would take everything she had left. She couldn't do it. It would be her ultimate failure to leave behind everyone she loved, everything she had worked for. Leia had to stay. She had to continue fanning the tiny flame of hope, or the resistance would die. Her thumb went back and forth across the cool face of Han's medal. Her heart had been so full of hope then, after their first big victory against the Empire. Giving these medals to Luke and Han had been more than a public celebration. They had been a symbolic awarding of leadership. She'd shared the burden ever since that day. She sighed with a heavy realization. She'd had it backward. Letting go wasn't giving up. It was the ultimate act of hope. Hope for her proteges, Rae and Poe, faith in the lessons she'd taught them. The last thing they would learn from her was how to go on without her, thus finally embracing their own destinies as leaders. Bail Organa had been the one to teach her that. Her adopted father had trusted her to find Obi-Wan Kenobi and save the rebellion when she was just a young woman with less experience than any of them. "Leia," Luke prompted. "If Vader could become Anakin again, Kylo Ren could become Ben." Her son was tempted by the light. She could sense it. But even if he never turned back the way Anakin had, she still loved him, and her legacy was secure. She was Leia Skywalker Organa Solo. As she caressed Han's medal, she fully embraced all those inheritances, and she would pass them all to the next generation. Her Skywalker legacy would go to Rae, Organa to Poe, and she would try one last time to pass her Solo legacy to her son. So that's how it would be, a final act of hope, and then she would rest. She reached at the Force, let it surround her, fill her. She thought the effort would exhaust her, but she felt a momentary rush of strength and energy as she connected with every living thing. She reached deeper, and then deeper still. With all the life and love and hope and forgiveness in her being, she called out, "Ben." Her last thought washed through the galaxy like a wave. She was vaguely aware of Han's metal clattering to the floor, aware of sadness from R2-D2, and finally a surge of welcome from Luke, who was not alone. Poe sat in the dark, beside Leia's covered body. "I gotta tell you," he told her. "I don't know how to do this. What you did, I'm not ready." "Neither were we," came a voice from the shadows, and Poe turned. It was Lando Calrissian. The former rebellion general had flown to Agent Cloth on his ship, the Lady Luck, almost as soon as they had left Pisana. Something Rae had said convinced him, and Poe was so glad he was here. "Luke, Han, Leia, me," Lando said. "Who's ever ready?" Poe stepped toward him. According to Connix, Lando had been overcome with grief when he arrived just a little too late. He'd missed his chance to say goodbye. Lando looked as sad as Poe felt. His brow knitted, his shoulders slumped. He kept eyeing Leia's shroud. He'd probably regret not coming sooner for the rest of his life. Poe understood what it was to regret. "How'd you do it?" Poe asked. "How'd you defeat an empire with almost nothing?" Lando was silent for a long moment. Then, "We had each other. That's how we won. We were friends." A light dawned in Poe's mind. For the first time since his return to Agent Closs, he smiled. Well guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to force push that like button. May the 4th be with you. I know it's a bit late, a couple days late, 1 or 2 days late. Bit different around the world in time though. But may the 4th be with you always. Revenge of the 5th as well. Yeah, force push that like button if you did enjoy this video. Hit the subscribe button because this is really the start of it. The next from now it just all goes up another level. The parts of the novel, the whole part of this after is like the whole second half of the movie. Yeah, hope you enjoyed. Please let me know down below if you are enjoying what you want to see next for the Rise of Skywalker novel. Until next time, subscribe to join the Kenobi crew and to be enrolled in the TK Jedi Order. And may the 4th be with you always.